Good evening. My name is Zui Natu. I'm a French language translator and teacher. I have an MPhil in French. I've done my BA in French from Ferguson College in the year 2000, and I have done my MA and MPhil in French between the years 2000 and 2004 from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Uh, After 2004, I have been teaching the language as well as working as a translator with various companies and in freelance. And I have been a teacher with the Alliance Française de Pune, which is the French Embassy's cultural institute. I've also been a French language teacher with Symbiosis Institute of Foreign and Indian Languages. I have taught French at Ferguson College, both at the junior college and the senior college level. And since the past 5 to 7 years, I have already also been teaching French as an introductory subject for engineering students of College of Engineering, Pune. Before we move on to our topic of discussion today, let me thank Saili Agashe and the organization Girvan for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. Girvan is a new player on the block in the field of working for languages, both Indian and foreign languages in our context. It is ironical that in a country that is like ours, which is basically a multilingual society, language teaching in both the school and the college levels is generally neglected. And our attitudes towards languages are something that we need to work on. And Girvan has entered this field to basically work towards changing this perspective. I wish them all the best for all their future endeavors in both the Indian language and the foreign language domain. Okay, moving on. Now on to our topic of discussion. Before we actually begin to see what your paper looks like and what the elements are that you need to focus on, I would like to remind you of the fact that in order to successfully attempt your 10th standard paper, your grammatical concepts of standards 8th and 9th have to be well prepared because these are the building blocks for your standard 10th paper. I'm now sharing a PPT, and before we actually move on to the paper pattern and the different questions that will be asked, question types that will be asked in the standard 10th paper, let's look at the syllabus that we did cover in standards 8th and 9th. 1 minute, please. All right, so I'm going to scroll down instead of actually starting from the beginning. And here's what your grammar portion for standards 8th and 9th is. Standard 8th, subject pronouns, indefinite and definite articles, the verbs être and avoir in the present tense, affirmative, negative, and interrogative sentences, prepositions, les présentatifs, which are your building blocks for basic introductory sentences. So c'est, ce sont, il y a. Interrogative sentences that are formed by using question words, right? Then nouns, singular and plural, masculine and feminine variations. Adjectives, demonstrative adjectives, possessive adjectives, their masculine, feminine, singular, plural variations. Qualifying adjectives, so whether these are adjectives of nationality, profession, physical description, size, etc., or emotive descriptions, moods, personalities, all of those. So qualifying adjectives. And the position of qualifying adjectives, what happens in the general, as a general rule, and what are the exceptions, and if they are placed before the noun, what other changes take place. Verb categories, ER verbs, IR verbs, and RE verbs, which you do in the 10th standard portion. All right. Then irregular verbs, article contracté with both prepositions a and the, also article partitif with the preposition the. Then the imperative mood. So the present tense that you look at in chapters 8 and in standards 8 and 9 is basically the present tense of the indicative mood. And then you also look at the imperative mood, all right? Then demonstrative adjectives, the pronoun on and its three meanings, whether it is someone or people in general or we. Then the use of the use of we, no, and see. So your affirmative question and affirmative answer, negative question and negative answer, affirmative question, negative answer, and finally negative question and affirmative answer. And then emphatic or disjunctive pronouns, which we call in French as les pronoms toniques, their uses and their grammatical positions. Comparative and superlatives and how they are formed using adjectives. So that's your portion for standard 8, quite a lot of it. So make sure that you have revised all of this before you get on with your 10th standard portion. Standard 9th are reverbs, then degrees of comparison. Then in the 9th standard, you also look at 2 other tenses of the indicative mood before you start with the passé composé. So those 2 other tenses are the futur proche and the passé récent. Pronominal verbs, how they are formed, and especially what their structure is in the imperative mood, and direct object pronouns, and of course passé composé that I talked about. A few things that you need to know here. So when we are looking at, for example, nouns and their genders, etc., it's a good practice for you to learn the gender of nouns, because you know that all nouns, animate and non-animate, have a gender in French, and that's either the masculine or the feminine. There is no neuter gender. And it's not always very, except for animate nouns where there's a natural masculine and feminine variation, it's not always easy to memorize which nouns are masculine and which nouns are feminine. A strategy that I generally advise my students, and which seems to work with most of them, is to actually do this in writing and put your all your vocabulary in 2 columns as per what you see fit. So, for example, all masculine nouns will go in the left-hand side column, and all feminine ones will go in the right-hand side column. Why do I encourage students to do this? Because most of us have a visual memory. So many a times it's during the exam and when you're a little tense, you might forget what the gender of a noun is. But if you close your eyes, there are very good chances that you will remember which side of the column you put it on. Yeah, so it's an educated guess. And remember that these strategies work if you do a lot of work before your exams are going to come on. So no last minute work, that is not going to happen. Interrogative sentences, for negative sentences, of course, all the ne plus verb plus pa and the ne changing to an apostrophe before a verb conjugated with a vowel. And then if you change the pa to plus and other variations, what the changes in meaning will be. Interrogative sentences, especially both with the structures esker plus an interrogative word, and the interrogative with inversion of the subject and the of the subject or subject pronoun and the conjugated verb. All right, prepositions. So different kinds of prepositions, directions, prepositions that help you position something, prepositions of for countries, cities, etc. All right, presentative we spoke of, interrogatives with question words I also spoke of. Nouns, singular, plural, masculine, and feminine. Again, the same thing. When you do the column for masculine nouns one side, feminine the other, you can also make columns for different variations of those nouns, singular and plural, etc. This you can do for adjectives also. So yeah, adjectives, then place of adjectives, which adjectives go before. Memorize those, because that's not a very exhaustive, that's not a very long list. All right. Then the imperative mood, which is fairly easy to learn. Make sure that for the ER verbs, for the tu category, for the tu subject pronoun, you remove the S for the imperatives, etc. So these little rules, you need to memorize them well and keep them in mind while you're solving your paper. Verbs and verbs conjugation, an important thing to note when you're doing verbs is that since languages are primarily spoken first and written later or codified later, a lot of your confusions will get solved if you look at the language from its pronunciation point of view too. For example, let's look at ER verbs, and you have a variation with the GER verbs and the CER verbs. When you're conjugating these verbs in the present tense of the indicative mood, and you look at the subject pronoun nu, we see that for nu, you have to add an E before the ONS, which is the ending or the terminaison for the nu form, all right? Now, instead of just memorizing this, how about trying to understand why that happens? So now why that happens is that G followed by E will give us the sound je. So therefore the verb in the infinitive is manger. Whereas when you follow the G with O, it will give you the sound go, all right? We need the sound je, not go. For example, because it's so the infinitive is manger, and then you have je mange, tu manges, il elle en mange, vous mangez, and il elle mange. Only for nous, if you put G followed by an O, you'll get mongon. So it becomes nous mangeons instead of nous mangeons. So in order to change that mongon to mangeons, you have to add an extra E before the ONS. So when you try to understand the logic behind why you're doing these variations, it becomes easier for you to memorize them and they stay with you, all right? So that's a tip that you can use for learning verbs and their conjugations, etc. All right, what else do you have? You have demonstrative adjectives, you have the pronoun on, etc. And emphatic, disjunctive pronouns, etc. So this is the portion that you have for standards 8th and 9th. Now let's get on with our business of looking at standard 10th and what our paper pattern is like. So the textbook that you're going to follow for your portion is Le Français c'est un passe-partout, standard 10th, SSC. Grammar portion is of course grammar prescribed in grammar in the prescribed chapters, which for your purpose is chapters 1, 2, and 3. And all grammar concepts, like I mentioned, of standards 8th and 9th as per the board paper pattern. Writing whatever has been covered in chapters 1, 2, and 3. Okay, now let's look at our paper, structure of our paper. And before that, what are we looking for? What are we looking to test when we give you a standard 10th paper? 1, text comprehension. Do you understand sentence structures, text, and the entire message that is given in a particular paragraph? And are you able to respond to questions that are given in that text? All right. Vocabulary, writing. Are you able to write? So if you're given an agenda, you're able to write a descriptive text of 50 to 60 words. Are you able to write a descriptive text on different topics? For example, your trip to a certain place and what you liked, what you didn't like, etc. Or what your favorite festival is, or what your favorite meal is, or what you do for a certain weekend, etc., etc. So are you capable of putting the vocabulary and the grammatical structures that you have learned in simple sentences to write something? Then, of course, language structure, which is an important component. It has 15 marks in your paper, which is grammar. And then culture and civilization, which is the first question. And all the cultural and civilization elements that you've learned about France, they come here. Now, paper pattern. Total marks for your paper are 40. First question is on culture and civilization. So whatever you have learned in the first chapter, my suggestion to you is, because you have everything on your everything available on your fingertips today, instead of just memorizing and mugging up stuff from the textbook, take an effort to look online, look for videos on YouTube or information or even images to find out what exactly things that are written in your text mean, right? And for that, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to share a little file on just the first lesson of your textbook, all right? What you can do to prepare for stuff. Right. So this is your first chapter. And for your first chapter, so what you're focusing on is the region of Normandy. It's a good practice to go online or even in your textbook and check out if there is a map, which region we are talking about, all right? Also look at the important towns and cities that are there in that region, okay? So I think your text talks of Caen, and it talks of the Département Calvados, which is where apples are produced, and from apples where the cidre is made, yes? Then here, so here's a little video that I've attached here to show a little peek into the history, culture, civilization of the region of Normandy. It's in English. You can take a look at it. All right. Okay. Then you have vocabulary. So the region, of course, we looked at Normandy. The important town that's been mentioned is Caen. What are the other towns in the region? You can use these to talk about a descriptive text when you write. Suppose you're being asked to write a paragraph about your visit to Normandy. What will you write about? And then you can mention other towns. In, for example, Rouen has a university, etc. Right? Then paysage. What's the countryside like? Champ de fleurs, vache, all of that vocabulary you should be aware of. And the different elements culturels that have been mentioned in the chapter, for example, gastronomy, the cidre, like I mentioned, made from Calvados apples, camembert, which is an iconic cheese of this region, apples, les pommes, and crêpe, which is like a pancake or a dosa, and comes in both sweet and savory versions. Another element which is mentioned in your chapter and which is important is of a historical and cultural element to do with a very important French impressionist painter called Claude Monet, who developed a garden in a place called Giverny. You have many videos on YouTube available for Claude Monet's garden in Giverny. I've attached one. You can look at others, etc. So these are the cultural elements that are given in your chapter. So it's a good practice to actually look these information up. So instead of just mugging them up, you have a visual element in your brain, and this helps you to retain information longer for the purpose of your paper. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this and we go back to our paper pattern. All right, so there goes your paper question number 1 based on culture and civilization. Question number 2, which is based on grammar, which is 15 marks. Verb conjugations, different moods, different tenses, pronouns, so direct object pronouns that you've done, subject pronouns, pronom tonique, etc. Exercise based on that. Singular, plural, so you could have a sentence in the plural, make it singular, or vice versa. Similarly, a sentence in feminine, make it masculine, or vice versa. Then you have the part section A, which is basically a mix and match of different types of grammatical elements that you have done so far. So this could be questions on adjectives, articles, défini, indéfini, partitif, contracté, whatever, prepositions, adverbs, then affirmative, negative, interrogative sentences, comparatives, superlative, all of those. All right. So that covers your grammar portion. Moving on. Vocabulary. The third question would be based on vocabulary. Match the columns. For example, you could have a name of a city and you place the region that the city is in, or you could have the name of similarly you could say one column would say un vin, and then you look at what is given in the other column and find out which of them is the name of a wine or a cheese or things like that. All right. Obviously, all of this from your 3 chapters and vocabulary given there. Second part of you fill it with the correct word in the context, or this portion I think has been removed. You fill with the correct word in the context, and then you choose the incorrect one. No, it's there. Sorry, and you choose the incorrect word from the list. So, for example, here you could have say all names of continents, and then just one name of a country. So you remove that. All right, something like that. Now begins your written expression portion, which is again 5 marks. So you could have either an agenda, which is a diary of an organizer, and you look at the details given there, and from that you write a descriptive text of a person's routine. Then you write an essay, so a composition based on different things like we talked about, revisit your a certain region and what you liked about it. Then a favorite festival, activities that you do during a weekend, etc. All right. All topics covered only in chapters 1 to 3 of your standard 10th textbook. Then you could be also asked to write an email based on the same topics, right? Question number 5, a written comprehension, 5 marks. What I would like to suggest here for a written comprehension is, instead of directly jumping into the questions and answers of your comprehension, you have time on hand. Make sure you read the comprehension twice. Read it once, go through it, read it again, if possible, slower, to understand your text well. Only once you're sure that you've understood a major portion of your text, look at the questions. You'll be in a better position to not just to find the answers, but to avoid traps, if any. All right. And the final question is, either you translate a paragraph given in French into English, and make sure you respect the rules of English when you put it in English and not French, or you have a dialogue which has been given and you put it back in the correct order. So that's your paper pattern for the composite paper. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to share a sample paper with you to look at concretely what each of these sections holds. All right, 1 minute. There you go. So sample paper, let's say, 1 second, just 1 minute, huh? Stop sharing, 1 second. Okay, 1 second. Right, yeah. So here's your paper, which is a sample paper, which is for 40 marks. First question, répondez en français avec des phrases complètes à des questions suivantes. So you have a set of questions and you you give an answer to them. So, for example, these could be questions that are specifically about cultural elements of France, or based on vocabulary in the chapters, to ask about what you like or what your preferences are. For example, nommez votre saison préférée. So you should know the vocabulary for different seasons, and then you're being asked what your favorite season is. Or a question directly about some element of France. Okay, so for example, Le Jardin de Monet se trouve où? So we looked at it as Giverny, etc. Right? So that's the type of questions that you have for the culture and civilization section. Question number 2, like I said, grammar. We have looked at these different sections. Let's look at them a bit more in detail. For example, mettez les verbes entre parenthèses au temps et au mode qui convient. So you've been given verbs and you have to put. So you have to put. Sorry for lost connection there. So you have to put the verbs or tenses in the appropriate mood or tense. All right. Okay. It could be possible that in the brackets next to the infinitive verbs, you will be given the task that you have to do. So either put it in the futur proche or the passé composé or imperative. Next question. So see, you have elements which are underlined and you have to replace those with the appropriate pronoun, whether it is pronom sujet or un pronom complément d'objet direct or un pronom tonique, etc. Okay. Then, like I said, either you have something in the, you have two options, you have to do one of those. So, météo pluriel, un ou choix. So, you have a sentence in the singular, you have to make it into the plural, or even vice versa. Similarly, you have a sentence in, you have two sentences in the feminine, make them into a masculine word sentence. Like I said, the fifth portion of your grammar section is a mixture of all the things that you've done as far as grammar elements are concerned here. So you could have remplissez avec l'adjectif interrogatif, okay, which adjective interrogative is appropriate, the correct preposition or the correct article partitif, put a sentence into the negative, interrogative avec inversion, uh, uh, a comparative sentence using an adjective, etc., etc. All right. Third section of your paper is the vocabulary. So see here, you have these, you have a musée, for example, and you have to find which of these is the musée, all right? Or le hymne national of France, which is it of these four? So that's your vocabulary, strictly from the 3 chapters in your textbook. Then you have the second section. So you have a definition, and you have to define what it is basically. So what is grass, or when do we celebrate le réveillon, etc., etc. And the last section of your vocabulary is find out what is the odd man out. All right. Fourth question in your paper, compréhension écrite. So you read this and you answer the questions. All right. Question number 5. Any one of the 2 exercises, either you write an essay of 550 or 60 words. Let's look at the subject here. Votre séjour en Normandie. So you've gone and stayed in Normandy for a period of time, and you write a descriptive text on it, places, activities, cultural elements, etc. Everything that's been covered in the first chapter. You also, in fact, have a letter that's given in your first chapter, which gives you an example of how to write a descriptive text. All right. Or you have the agenda of Clara, and you look at vendredi, samedi, dimanche, and then you give a 50 to 60 word description in what she's doing during the weekend. So that's samedi and dimanche, right? Question number 6, and the last question in your paper is either you translate the text from French to English, make sure to follow the rules of English and not French, or you have a little dialogue and you can put it in the correct order. All right. So that's how your paper is. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. And before we come to a close, I would again like to thank Saili Agashe and Girvan for this opportunity. I hope this has been helpful. Bye-bye.